The pastor froze mid-sentence. He looked at the letter I handed him, my grandfather's final will, then said something no one expected. "This ceremony cannot proceed." Gasps, whispers. And just like that, my brother's church wedding came to a standstill because of a truth no one wanted to face. Hi, I'm Jenna, and no, I wasn't invited to my own brother's wedding, but I showed up anyway, holding the one thing they thought I'd never dare to use. What pushed me to do it? What was in that letter? And why did the entire room go silent? Before we jump into the story, if you don't mind, let me know where you're from by leaving a comment below. That way, I can send a special hello your way. Now go ahead, grab yourself a warm cup of water, and find a comfy spot. It's time to begin the story. It started like any other Saturday, early and quiet, with the scent of brown sugar and butter rising through the bakery's tiled floor. The bell above the front door jingled every few minutes as regulars trickled in for morning coffee and scones. I stood behind the register, punching numbers into the touchscreen, smiling the kind of smile that doesn't reach the eyes. Mom bustled behind the glass display, adjusting rows of lemon bars and pecan pies, humming along to a country song playing on the radio. She didn't look at me when she handed me a tray of sweet potato pie slices wrapped in wax paper. "Drop these in the warming case," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "Sure," I replied, even though I noticed she didn't say, "Happy birthday." I glanced at the small chalkboard on the counter. Today's special, sweet potato pie, $3.75. Of course, not today's Jenna's 30th, just pie. It's funny how the smallest omission can make you feel like an afterthought in your own life. I didn't expect balloons or a cake. I've lived long enough under this roof to know better. But I thought maybe, just maybe, someone would remember. Even a Post-it on the fridge would have done the trick. Instead, I poured coffee, wrapped pastries, and watched as my mother beamed at strangers. "Bless your heart, Mr. Atkinson, back for the oatmeal raisin again?" she cooed. Meanwhile, I restocked napkins and listened to the same bell jingle for everyone but me. Grandpa Calvin would have remembered. He always did. Every year, without fail, there'd be a handwritten card slipped into my coat pocket. "If they forget you," he once told me, "remember who you are." By late afternoon, the spring light dipped into gold, casting shadows on the bakery tile. I walked home to my apartment, a narrow second-floor unit above an antique store. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. I'd bought the plant in the corner on my 25th birthday. It still leaned toward the window like it was reaching for more light. I fed it, changed into jeans, and headed back out. Family dinner was at 6. When I arrived at my parents' house, the porch light was already on. The table inside was crowded with dishes: roast chicken, glazed carrots, macaroni baked in a cast-iron skillet. My name wasn't on a card, and there wasn't an extra chair set for a celebration. But there was someone new at the table. Vanessa. She stood when I walked in. "You must be Jenna," she said with a honey-sweet smile and eyes that glittered just a bit too much. I shook her hand, noting how smooth and practiced it felt. "Vanessa. Dylan's told me a lot," I said, though he really hadn't. Mom ushered me toward an empty seat without ceremony. No mention of my day, no raised glass. Just folded napkins and the smell of cornbread. We passed dishes. Vanessa laughed at Dad's stale jokes. Dylan leaned back, basking in the glow of being admired. And then, right after dessert, peach cobbler, not pie. Dylan cleared his throat. "Well," he said, grinning, "we've got some news." He reached for Vanessa's hand as she held up her left finger. A modest diamond sparkled under the chandelier. "We're engaged!" Cheers erupted. Mom clapped. Dad nodded with quiet approval. I smiled because that's what was expected, not because I felt it. Wine glasses clinked. Mom immediately launched into planning mode. "We'll need to reserve the church early. St. Andrew's books out fast." Vanessa looked around the table, then settled her gaze on me. "I heard your grandfather left you a trust," she said lightly, like commenting on the weather. "How wonderful to support family from that." Her voice was velvet, but her words sliced. The room fell quiet, like someone had dropped a utensil and no one wanted to pick it up. I set my fork down. "It's not accessible," I said evenly, "and it already has a purpose." She tilted her head, still smiling. "Of course. Just thought it'd make a wedding feel whole." Mom jumped in, refilling Vanessa's glass while mine remained empty. "We're just so excited," she said. "A wedding brings everyone together." Except apparently the woman whose birthday it was. I looked at Dad, but he focused on his plate like the pattern of grilled chicken bones could give him answers. I excused myself not long after, the sounds of laughter echoing behind me as I walked to my car. At home, I changed into pajamas and sat on the edge of my bed with Grandpa's old letter box in my lap. His handwriting had faded in spots, but the words were still clear. "If they forget you, remember who you are. Don't ever hand over what you built just to keep the peace." I folded the letter back into its envelope and held it to my chest. For the first time in a long time, I didn't cry. There was nothing left to grieve, just facts, just silence, and the growing certainty that something was beginning to shift. The cafe Vanessa chose had hanging ferns, slate blue patio chairs, and servers who wore linen aprons and smiled too much. The kind of place that sold Eggs Benedict at $12 a plate and didn't offer ketchup. When I arrived, 5 minutes early, there were already 3 glasses of mint lemonade sweating in the sun. "Jenna!" Vanessa waved like we were childhood friends reunited after years apart. "Come sit right here. I saved you a seat." The seat was between the hostess stand and a swinging door to the kitchen. Every few minutes, a server brushed past me with a tray of pastries or a bucket of ice. It didn't feel like a coincidence. I sat anyway, smoothing my blouse and nodding at the 2 women already seated. "This is Madison," Vanessa said, "and Serena. They're basically my sisters. You'll love them." Both wore pastel dresses and heels better suited for wedding receptions than weekend brunch. Madison's hair was pinned into a chignon so tight it made her brows arch. Serena had a rose gold clutch tucked under her elbow. "It's so great to finally meet you," Madison said, her tone syrupy. "Vanessa's told us how responsible you are. So grounded. A woman with a plan, right?" I smiled faintly. I try. The menus stayed closed. Vanessa didn't even look at hers. She ordered for everyone. Avocado toast for herself, something vegan for Serena, and a brunch platter for me. "You seem like a classic brunch platter girl," she said. "Balanced." I nodded. It didn't feel like a compliment. As we waited for the food, the conversation shifted quickly from casual to curated. They asked me about my job, my apartment, and then, almost seamlessly, about my grandfather. "Vanessa mentioned your grandfather left you a trust?" Serena asked, tilting her head like she was admiring an oil painting. "That's so rare these days. Family who plans ahead." "Very rare," Madison chimed in. "If my family did something like that, I'd definitely use it to support the people I care about." I took a sip of lemonade, forcing it down with a smile. "He left it for specific reasons," I said, "and it's not accessible yet." "Oh, of course," Vanessa said. "We were just saying. Some people are born lucky, and some people build their own luck. But when someone has both..." She let the thought hang, like a helium balloon drifting just out of reach. The food arrived. My fork clinked against the plate louder than it should have. They chatted about florists and venues, casually mentioning one that cost nearly 10 grand just to reserve. When Madison toasted to future sisters-in-law, she skipped my name. "Vanessa's so lucky to marry into your family," she said, raising her glass. I set down my fork and stood up. "Thank you for brunch," I said, "but I don't think this was ever about food." Vanessa blinked. "Jenna, I didn't ask them to say any of that. I just mentioned I was stressed. I'm sorry if you felt uncomfortable." I looked at her, steady and quiet. Being uncomfortable is fine. Being cornered is not. Then I left. Outside, the Charleston sun was climbing high. I walked 2 blocks before calling a rideshare. When I got home, I opened a fresh folder on my computer and labeled it Trust Conversations. I saved a quick note from memory, timestamped the brunch, and closed the lid. That evening, my phone buzzed. A message from Dylan. Vanessa was just nervous. Don't overreact. She really wants to be close with you. I didn't answer. Monday morning came with the usual pace. Emails, back-to-back meetings, lunch at my desk. The week passed like mist. On Thursday, a letter arrived. It was in a cream-colored envelope with a law firm's name embossed on the front, Everhart and Lee. Inside was a 2-paragraph inquiry, politely worded, requesting clarification of the conditions surrounding the Calvin Walker Family Trust, addressed to me by name. It was unsigned, but the firm name matched one Vanessa had interned at years ago back in college. I read it twice, then again. My hands didn't shake. I made a copy and slipped the original into a drawer with Grandpa's letter. By Friday evening, the whole thing felt like a bad page torn from a polite novel. That is, until Mom called. She opened with her usual, "Hi, honey. How's your week?" Then came the part that made my jaw tighten. "I just think you might be overthinking things. Vanessa's under a lot of pressure, planning this wedding mostly by herself. We all just want what's best for Dylan." I let her finish before answering. "And what about what's best for me, Mom?" Silence. Sometimes I think silence weighs more than words, especially when it comes from your own mother. There's a framed photo of me and Dylan when we were little, standing on the front porch in matching pumpkin costumes. It's still on the fireplace mantel at my parents' house, right next to a vase of silk dogwood stems and a bronze clock that's been broken since 2010. Every time I come home, I notice that picture. Sometimes it feels like a ghost of who I used to be, someone included. It was mid-October when I stopped by to pick up a box of old books from the garage. Mom had texted that they were clearing space before the holidays. I didn't argue. I figured the cool air and the scent of falling leaves would do me some good. The garage was musty, stacked with bins labeled in Dad's blocky handwriting. Xmas lights, kitchen extras, Jenna HS. I pulled mine down, brushed off a layer of dust, and opened the lid. Inside, a faded hoodie from my senior year, a stack of AP English essays, a photo album with those peel and stick pages that never stuck properly. I ran my hand over the cover, heart already sinking. Just then, I heard voices from inside. I stepped into the kitchen where the scent of cinnamon and pumpkin candles wrapped around everything like memory. Vanessa was at the table with Mom, scrolling through a laptop. Her nails tapped rhythmically against the keys. "Oh, Jenna," Mom said, "you're still here." Vanessa smiled. "We're just going over some early layout ideas. Ceremony order, processional, reception seating, that sort of thing." I nodded, stepping closer. On the screen was a spreadsheet titled Moore Walker Wedding, March 25th. My eyes scanned the rows: bride, groom, parents, best man, maid of honor, bridesmaids, groomsmen, grandparents, extended family procession. No mention of sister, no mention of me. I didn't say anything at first. I just tilted my head and asked, "Did I miss a tab?" Vanessa's fingers froze. Mom looked up, mildly startled. "What do you mean?" I don't see myself listed." Anywhere Vanessa glanced at Mom, then said smoothly, "We assumed you might not feel comfortable participating, given, well, everything." Mom followed with, "We didn't want you to feel pressured, sweetheart." I laughed, just once, short and sharp. "Don't worry," I said. "I feel exactly as included as I expected." I turned to leave, but Vanessa's voice caught me mid-step. "You're being selfish." I paused, my hand still resting on the doorframe. "One day," she said, her tone still sweet on the surface, "you'll regret not standing with your brother." I looked at her. She didn't blink. The kitchen was silent except for the ticking of that old bronze clock, still stuck at 5:42. I didn't respond. I didn't have to. Not right then. Back in the garage, I shoved the lid back on the box and carried it to my trunk. As I drove home, leaves skittered across the windshield, and I passed the church sign at St. Andrew's, white plastic letters on a navy board. Upcoming ceremony, March 25th, Moore and Walker. Not Dylan and Vanessa, not welcome family. Just 2 last names, side by side. That night, I sat on the floor beside my bed and pulled out Grandpa Calvin's keepsake box. I hadn't touched it since last winter. The lid creaked open like a door into a quieter time. Inside were small, ordinary things. His war medals, a pack of chewing gum he always carried, his spare glasses in a cracked case. And there, tucked beneath a yellowed sheet of newspaper, an envelope. It read in his careful handwriting, "Only if needed." I didn't open it. Not yet. But I held it for a long time, the paper soft from age, heavier than it should have been. Eventually, I stood up, walked into the kitchen, and poured myself a glass of water. I stared out the window as the streetlights flickered on. Then I reached for my phone, dug through old contacts, and found the number I hadn't dialed in years. Melanie Grant, estate attorney. I texted 4 words. I think they've gone too far. It took less than 20 minutes for her to call me back. Jenna Walker? Her voice was smooth, alert. Yes, I said quietly. What's going on? I looked out at the night. My reflection stared back from the window, older, tired, but not broken. I might need to review a trust my grandfather left me, I said, because people who were never part of his vision keep trying to redraw the picture. Melanie was quiet for a beat. Then, let's talk. Tomorrow? Tomorrow's good. As I hung up, the leaves outside rustled like a whisper, and for the first time in months I felt a shift, not just around me, but within. Sometimes silence is the loudest signal of all, and this time I was done pretending not to hear it. Melanie's office smelled faintly of jasmine and printer ink. The floors were wood, polished to a shine so clear I could see the outline of my shoes in them. Along the wall were shelves of legal books, tidy and upright like soldiers waiting for instruction. She didn't ask me how I was doing. She simply handed me a ceramic mug of tea and said, "Let's begin." I placed the folder on the table between us and opened it with quiet precision. Inside were screenshots, emails, printed text messages, and 1 page from a group chat that Vanessa had posted to her Instagram story, though she had later deleted it. I had saved it the moment I saw it. Melanie read in silence, underlining here and there with a soft pencil. Her expression never changed, but I noticed the faint narrowing of her eyes with every page. When she finished, she leaned back in her chair, fingers steepled. "The clause is enforceable," she said. I exhaled. "If this trust is being misused through coercion, pressure, or misrepresentation of familial obligation," she continued, "we can formally request a freeze. And if there's any further attempt to interfere, we'll escalate to legal injunction." She stood and walked to a drawer behind her desk. From it, she withdrew a pale yellow envelope printed with her firm's seal in gold foil. She handed it to me. "I'd like you to give this to the officiating party. Directly, quietly but clearly." I took the envelope, my fingers grazing its smooth paper. "You don't have to argue," she said gently. "Just show the truth." Back at home, I placed the envelope on my kitchen table and opened the blinds. Morning sun poured through the window, casting shadows across the tile. My apartment was still, the kind of quiet that didn't ache anymore. Just space. Space I had built. I stared at the old envelope from Grandpa, still tucked in the top drawer of my nightstand. I pulled it out, ran my fingers over his handwriting again. "Only if needed." I didn't open it yet. I slid it into my purse next to Melanie's envelope, as if one protected the other. Later that afternoon, I walked down to the Ashley River. The breeze was soft, just enough to lift my hair, and the water shimmered like it had secrets. I leaned against the railing and watched a small boat glide by. I thought about Grandpa and how we used to come here after bakery deliveries. He'd always get a hot dog from a vendor nearby and tell me the same story about how he met my grandmother in a church choir, even though he couldn't carry a tune. "You won't always be surrounded," he once said while tossing crumbs to ducks, "but you'll always have a choice." That sentence lived in my chest like a compass needle. My phone buzzed as I was heading home. A message from an old classmate who now worked part-time at the church. FY, you're not on the Moore Walker wedding guest list. Just saw the finalized version. Thought you should know. I stared at the message for a moment, then typed back, thanks. Not surprised. It was a strange feeling. Not hurt exactly, just confirmation. A quiet door clicking shut from the other side. That evening, I opened my closet and chose a navy blue dress I hadn't worn in 2 years. Simple lines, long sleeves. I laid it on the bed next to my sensible heels and my black coat. I slipped Melanie's envelope into the inner pocket. Then carefully, I placed Grandpa's letter right next to it. I stood there for a moment, looking at everything. It didn't feel like preparation for a confrontation. It felt like a boundary. I made a cup of chamomile tea, turned off my phone, and sat on the couch with the light dimmed low. The plant in the corner brushed softly against the window pane as if nodding. I slept through the night. The next morning, Sunday, I dressed without rush. The streets were quieter than usual, early light filtering through Spanish moss that draped across the neighborhood oaks. A cardinal landed briefly on the porch railing as I locked my door. The rideshare car arrived on time. The driver was polite, didn't make small talk, just let jazz play low from the speakers. As we turned the corner onto the church street, I could already see the crowd gathering. Guests in pale dresses and navy suits, laughter bubbling under the sound of bells. White flowers lined the walkway, hydrangeas and roses tied in twine. The front steps of the church were swept clean, and 2 ushers stood by the door checking off names. I stepped out of the car, heels crunching softly on the gravel path. A woman in a mauve hat glanced at me, then leaned over and asked gently, "Are you with the bride's side?" I looked at her and smiled, my voice calm. "Not exactly." The stained glass windows of St. Andrew's caught the morning light just so, casting slanted pools of color along the aisle. Blues, reds, and golds flickered across the polished wood floor like a kaleidoscope of quiet judgment. I stepped into the vestibule without a sound, my heels absorbing the weight of each step. In my coat pocket, Melanie's envelope pressed lightly against my side. Beside it, Grandpa's letter sat folded but not forgotten. The ushers glanced at me, then looked away. My name wasn't on any list, but no one stopped me. Inside, the sanctuary was full. Pews lined with guests in pastels and pearls. Hydrangea bundles hung from the end of each row, tied with cream ribbon. At the front, a string quartet played a softened version of Canon in D. I stood just inside the door, waiting. The procession had started. Bridesmaids in pale lavender moved like slow brushstrokes up the aisle. Vanessa hadn't appeared yet, but Dylan was already standing at the altar, tall, nervous, hands clasped in front of him. Mom and Dad sat in the front pew, backs straight, eyes forward. Then came the pause. The music softened. The pastor, a tall man with silver-rimmed glasses and a soft, southern drawl, stepped forward to begin the ceremony. He spoke gently, welcoming everyone. Then he said the line, "If there is any reason, spiritual or legal, why these two should not be joined today, speak now." His voice caught just slightly on the word legal. That's when I stepped forward, not quickly, not dramatically, just calmly, one foot after the other, moving past the murmuring rows of guests. Eyes widened, fans stilled, mid-flutter. I reached the front and handed the envelope to the pastor. His eyebrows drew together, confused but not alarmed. He opened the flap and removed the letter inside. As he read, the color in his cheeks changed, ever so slightly. A slow breath passed through his nose. He folded the paper once more and looked at Dylan, then Vanessa, then the guests. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "This ceremony cannot proceed." A stillness fell across the sanctuary, heavy as stone. There was no shouting. No one stood. Only gasps, hushed whispers, a few hands instinctively pressed to chests. Vanessa's bouquet slipped from her fingers, landing on the marble floor with a muted thud. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. Her eyes darted from the pastor to me to Dylan, trying to find a thread to grab onto. Dylan didn't speak. He just stared at me, eyes wide, stunned, the corners of his mouth trembling as if he didn't know what shape to hold. The pastor cleared his throat. The contents of this document pertain to the legality and ethics surrounding a trust left by the bridegroom's grandfather. Due to implications of coercion and misrepresentation, the matter must be settled before any lawful union can occur in this house of worship. A murmur rippled down the pews. I said nothing. I didn't look at Vanessa. I didn't look at my parents. I turned and walked. The aisle felt longer going back. Each step echoed louder now, not because of the acoustics, but because no one else moved. At the back, I reached the vestibule just as the church bells began to toll, not in celebration, but because noon had struck and time waited for no one. As I stepped out into the light, a breeze lifted the hem of my coat. The white flowers along the steps swayed slightly, as if they too were holding their breath. Then I heard it. Jenna. I stopped. It wasn't a shout, just a word caught in a throat. I turned. Dylan stood at the threshold, the church doors open behind him. His tie was slightly crooked now. His face wasn't angry. It looked unsure, bare. The kind of look someone wears when they suddenly realize the map they'd followed didn't lead to where they thought. His eyes met mine, and they held there. There were no apologies. Not yet. Just that look. Something closer to regret than anger. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't flinch under his gaze. I simply nodded once, turned back toward the street, and walked down the steps, the sealed envelope still in my coat pocket, the one Grandpa had written, "Only if needed." I hadn't opened it. I still didn't. But somehow, I felt like I already knew what it said. They say, "You've changed." But what they often mean is, "You stopped letting us use you." A full year had passed since the day I walked into St. Andrews with a folded envelope and left without a single raised voice. No one said my name on the news. There was no scandal, no press. Just a quiet pause in a church and a story that dissolved behind closed doors. The wedding was never rescheduled. Vanessa deleted her social media 3 weeks after the ceremony was canceled. At first, there were whispers in the family thread, questions about what happened, theories, tiny jabs sent in the form of concern. But then the curiosity faded, as it always does when people realize there's no performance to watch anymore. She disappeared as quickly as she had arrived. I didn't see Dylan for a long time. He didn't call, but every few months a short message would pop up. "Hope you're well. I've started reading again. Remember that book you once gave me? Just wanted to say, I'm sorry for everything." I didn't respond, not out of anger, but because sometimes silence holds more boundaries than words. One evening in late autumn, I stopped by the bakery to drop off a repair estimate for the display case. The front windows fogged slightly in the chilly air, and the scent of cinnamon rolls drifted from the back oven. Mom stood behind the counter, wiping down the glass. She looked up when the door jingled. "Oh," she said. "Hi." We hadn't spoken much since the wedding. There were polite texts, a card for my birthday, generic and unsigned, but this time she reached beneath the counter and handed me a small white box. I didn't ask what it was, I just opened it. Inside were 6 ginger cookies, crisp along the edges, dotted with sugar. My favorite. The ones she hadn't baked since I was 16. "I kept the recipe," she said, not meeting my eyes. "For you." I nodded and tucked the box under my arm. We didn't say more. Some forgiveness doesn't need dialogue, just presence. That weekend, I walked to the Ashley River alone, the sun low in the sky and the water glinting like brushed gold. The wind had a winter edge to it, but not yet cold enough to bite. My coat held the familiar weight of Grandpa's envelope. I sat on the same bench where we used to sit when I was a girl, my legs dangling over the edge, listening to him hum old tunes under his breath. I opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a single slip of paper, blank except for one line. "You knew what to do." I smiled, folded it carefully, and placed it in my coat pocket next to my keys. The kind of smile that's more about release than joy. 2 weeks later, I stopped by a small bookstore cafe on the corner of King and Warren. I hadn't been inside in years, but I'd once told the owner, a soft-spoken man named Luis, that I dreamed of hosting community readings or small art nights. He recognized me immediately. "You still thinking about hosting events?" he asked, wiping his hands on a towel. I looked around at the cozy shelves, the chalkboard menu with apple cider and lemon scones, the string lights draped across the back wall. "Yeah," I said, "I think I am." We shook hands. As I left, the cold wind wrapped around my scarf. The city was already lit for the holidays, storefronts glowing with orange and red, windows lined with twinkle lights. My feet carried me home without rush. That night, I placed Grandpa's letter in a memory box under my bed, alongside a few black and white photos and the keychain from my first apartment. I didn't need it to remind me anymore, but I wanted to keep it, not as a shield, but as a seed. Just before bed, my phone buzzed. Another message from Dylan. This one was longer. "I know it's late to say this, but I wish I'd listened sooner. Not just to what you said, but what you didn't. I'm trying to be better now. I don't expect anything. I just wanted you to know that." This time, I didn't ignore it. I didn't type anything back right away. I just read the words, then set the phone on my nightstand and breathed deeply, letting the air settle inside my chest. Maybe forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. Maybe it just starts with not forgetting who you are. That night, I slept soundly, with no envelope in my pocket, no weight on my chest, and no one else's story trying to replace my own. And in the quiet that followed, I remembered, peace doesn't ask for permission. It just arrives when you finally stop making yourself small to fit inside someone else's version of love. Sometimes the greatest peace doesn't come from winning. It comes from walking away with your dignity intact. As I closed Grandpa's final letter and stepped into a life that was truly mine, I realized I never needed to raise my voice to be heard. In life, there are moments when love must include boundaries, and strength means knowing when silence is no longer kind. Family doesn't begin and end with blood. It lives in the choices we make to protect our peace and honor our values. We don't owe people our silence, especially when it costs us our self-respect. If this story reminded you of a moment where you stood your ground or found your voice, I'd love to hear it. Feel free to share your reflections. And if you'd like more stories like this, I invite you to stay connected. Sometimes the quietest stories leave the deepest echoes.